Welcome back, everybody, for our weekly sermonette. I guess it's weekly, now that we're still in our current situation where we can't all be in shul together. Hope everybody's doing fine. I hope everybody's well and healthy, and all your families and extended friends and family are all doing well. Talking about this fact that we cannot be in shul this Shabbos, I'd like to focus on that for a moment as well. Several people have called me and have contacted me, perhaps we can make a minyan like that, perhaps we can make a minyan like this, perhaps we can get together people in a different circumstances to be able to say Kaddish, and a lot of these requests and really feeling bad that they cannot be in shul. Now, being in shul is a great thing, community is a great thing, and I think we have our community, but I'd like to focus on this idea of this unbelievable desire to try to figure out a way to circumvent, if you want to say, the system, to be able to make a minyan and to be in shul, or maybe make a minyan outside, etc., etc. Why do we even go to shul? Why do we even get together with a minyan? And in that sense, we can ask the question, why do we even do Judaism at all? Everything about Judaism. We need to go back and focus what it's really all about and what we're trying to accomplish with it. And somebody once asked me, for people ask for one-liners or taglines, and we were talking about Judaism, we were talking about religion, and sort of a way that we could really sum up all of religion, or what is religion all about, I could sum it up to one sentence. And the sentence that I could sum it up to is, what does God want me to do now? And I'm going to repeat that because this is very, very focused. All of religion could be summed up to one sentence. And that is, a person has to ask themselves, what does God want me to do now? And in every circumstance, in every time we find ourselves, it'll be something different. There are days that God wants us to fast. There's days that He doesn't want us to fast, wants us specifically to eat. And even different times of the day, and different days and different circumstances, He wants things different from us. If I'm going to eat, what am I allowed to eat? What does God want me to eat? What does God not want me to eat? What am I supposed to say? What am I not supposed to say? And so on and so forth. It all boils down to, what does God want me to do now? So under normal circumstances, God wants me to go to shul and wants me to be at the minyan, wants me to hear the Torah reading. I might argue that in our circumstance now, God actually wants us not to get together and not to make the minyan and not to have public Torah readings. And He wants us to stay home. So in essence, what we are supposed to be doing, what does God want us to do? We are actually doing and we are fulfilling. That is the holy acts that we need to do. That is what Kaddish is. Kaddish is about sanctification. I'd like to share two quick stories, I think, that highlight this concept. And you might have heard the story because it's been going around because of this current situation. There's a famous story of two brothers. They were known as Rabbi Elimelech and his brother Zusha. And this is going back in old times of old Russia. And they were traveling from town to town. They used to collect money. Later, Rabbi Elimelech became a great rabbi and a great rebbe. But during this time that they were traveling, they happened to come to a certain city, and for whatever reason, the authorities used to always like to stop Jews in their activities. They were both thrown into prison, and the prison at the time was one large room where everybody was thrown into one room together. And while they were sitting there in that room with all different types of criminals, if you want to say, the way the room was set up, everybody was in one room. And in the middle of the room, they noticed, was this bucket. That bucket was the public restroom for everybody that was in that room. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, Reb Zusha realized that with that bucket, with its content there in the room, they weren't able to pray. They weren't able to daven. And therefore, he got very sad. And he started to lament and cry that he was not able to daven. And he started crying, and Reb Melech, his brother, asked him, "What are you crying?" And he says, "Look, we can't daven mincha because it came time to daven mincha, and we can't daven mincha now because of this bucket here in the middle of the room." And Rabbi Elimelech turned around and he says, that's a reason to be happy. He says, why? He says, because the same code of Jewish law, the same Shulchan Aruch that tells us that we have to daven, is the same code of Jewish law that tells us that when there's a bucket in the room, with the obviously very foul-smelling bucket in a room, you are supposed to not daven mincha. So this is a mitzvah you never had the opportunity to fulfill, and now you have the opportunity to be able to fulfill this mitzvah of not davening when there's a foul-smelling bucket in the room. Hearing this, Reb Zusha got all excited and happy, and Reb Zusha and Rabbi Elimelech got up and they started to dance. They started to dance. They have an opportunity to do a mitzvah they've never able to do before. And at that time, one of the guards heard the noise, the commotion that was going on, people dancing. So he walks into the room and he sees these two Hasidic Jews dancing, and he asks one of the other people, what's going on? So they tell him, we don't know, it has something to do with the bucket. They were motioning, talking about the bucket, and then they started dancing. They're all excited about the bucket. So he got so upset at them that he took the bucket and took it out of the room. Lo and behold, at that point they were able to daven mincha. But the point being is that the question is, what does God want me to do? And in this situation, first of all, on a personal note, I mean, I've met a lot of people here in Memphis and spoken to a lot of people, and thank God most people don't have anybody that they know firsthand that's been really seriously affected by the current situation of people that are really not ill. Rifki and I both come from New York. New York was hit very, very hard. Thousands of people are sick with the coronavirus. We have relatives that are sick. We have relatives that were hospitalized. We even know people personally who have unfortunately succumbed to this virus. So this is a lot more serious. This is a lot more closer to home than you might realize. And all the things that were put into place are really there for us to be able to protect people and literally protect their lives. So in that sense, we have to ask ourselves, what does God want me to do now? And just one other quick story. There's a famous story about the first Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, where one time when it came to Kol Nidre, the Kol Nidre service was on Yom Kippur, and everybody was in shul, in Reb Shneir Zalman's shul, and in the middle of Kol Nidre, all of a sudden Reb Shneir Zalman slipped out of the synagogue. Somebody followed him to see where he was going. It must be something very, very important on Yom Kippur that he had to do, something more important than being in shul on Kol Nidre. And lo and behold, he followed him. And we found out that what Reb Shneir Zalman did was he went to the outskirts of town. On the outskirts of town, there was a hut, where in that home there was a woman who has recently given birth, and there was nobody there to take care of her. And at that time, she had no food or milk for herself and her baby. And Reb Shneir Zalman went, and on Yom Kippur, he chopped wood, lit a fire, and cooked milk for the mother, so she should be able to nurse her baby. That, you would say, Yom Kippur, what's more greater than being in shul at Kol Nidre? And the answer is, it depends where, what, and when. And at that point, for Reb Shneir Zalman, a very, very holy Jew, who probably appreciated Yom Kippur a lot more than you and I, and yet, for that Yom Kippur, and at that time, chopping wood, lighting a fire, and cooking was the act that was necessary on Yom Kippur. So I hope this puts us in perspective that we should really not even feel bad. We should actually be happy. We should be happy that all of a sudden God has given us direction of what we need to do and how we need to do it. And I think that focus, we should actually be doing what we're doing with happiness. And like we mentioned last week, this is not something that God is letting happen. This is something that God is making happen. And in that sense, because God is making it happen, there's a reason it's happening. And you know what? It might be to test me. It might be, there's a lot of reasons behind it. As we mentioned last week, bringing families closer, etc., etc. And that brings us to this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is the Parsha Vayikra. It's the first of the third book of the Torah portion of Vayikra. It talks about sacrifices. Now, question is, sacrifices, there's so many sections and so many chapters and verses that talk about sacrifices. And it obviously a reference to the sacrifices that were brought in the temple and on the altar, sacrificing of an animal, etc. What does that have to do with me today? Can I bring a sacrifice today? How do I bring a sacrifice? How do I bring a sacrifice now that I can't even go to shul? What am I sacrificing? Now, actually, Hasidism teaches us that that if you take the words and of the verse, the first verse in the Parshat Vayikra, it says, "Adam ki yakriv mikem karban laHashem." A man, a person who will sacrifice from you a sacrifice to God. And really the sacrifice, when we brought the animal on the altar, it wasn't about the animal, it was really about us. And today's days, we can actually sacrifice. In a sense, you could sacrifice the animal within inside of us. Each and every one of us has a godly soul and an animal soul. Godly soul does what God wants. Animal soul is focused on what I want. If we could take that which we want to do, our animalistic tendencies, or even our own personal desires, and we sacrifice them. And in a sense, we sacrifice them, meaning we focus more on what God wants me to do, then that is a karban, that is a sacrifice to God. And in the Hebrew word karban actually comes from the word karov. That's how we draw ourselves nearer to God. If the whole purpose of coming to shul and observance of Judaism is to draw ourselves closer to God, that is when we give up our own personal desires and we do what God wants us to do. And we recognize that that is really the main purpose of what we are here for and what we're supposed to focus for. I was talking to somebody the other day and came up in conversation, and they turned around like, somebody's, why would God do this, etc. And it came up to this point that, if I were God, I would do it exactly the same. Only if I was God, I'd know why it has to be so. So we don't know why it has to be so. We don't understand the ways of God or what He's doing, but we know that He's given us direction of what we're supposed to do. So let us hope that we should be able to we're supposed to serve God with joy and with happiness. Let us sacrifice our desires for God's desires and draw ourselves closer to God and realize that this is all for a purpose. As we come closer to the holiday of Pesach, there was the Karban Pesach, the sacrificial lamb of Pesach. We draw ourselves nearer to God. We should do so with joy and with happiness. And it says, when you make your will God's will, hopefully God in return will make God's will similar to your will. And let us hope that we should be able to get out of our current situation quickly and speedily and miraculously. As we're going to the holiday of Pesach, God made great miracles and great wonders, and they happened instantaneously. Let us hope that we should be able to get out of our current situation also instantaneously with the greatest miracles. We're now in the month of Nisan, the month of miracles. The root of the word Nisan is Nes. May we merit to see those miracles for each and every one of us, and may God bring healing and comfort to all those that were affected by this situation and that were hurt, and may we only see happiness and health. Shabbat Shalom.